Welcome to Dreamed It, Then Real Lifed It, the podcast where we dive deep into the journey from vision to reality. I'm Kelly Jackson, your guide on this path of self-discovery, transformation, and intentional living. Here, we explore everything from mindset shifts and personal growth to spiritual alignment and entrepreneurship, sharing insights, stories, and actionable wisdom to help you live a life in harmony with your dreams. Every episode will dig into what it means to not only dream big, but to actually consciously create the life you envision. Let's turn your dreams into real life. What happens when life changes frequency? When you realize that the things that belong to our lives don't always belong there forever or in the same form. There are relationships, routines, responsibilities, identities, objects, places, dreams, businesses, habits, entire ways of living that can be completely right for one version of our life and eventually become incompatible with the life that we're now living. This doesn't retroactively make them wrong. And recognizing that something needs to change does not require us to manufacture a story, a narrative, a villain, a failure, a dramatic ending, a this, that, or the other. Sometimes it's like the only thing that has to happen is the frequency has to change. Think of frequency as a dial on the radio. Your frequency, you change the dial, you change the frequency, a different signal comes in. It's just think of it that way, kind of loosely in the back of your mind when I talk about the frequency. So one of the more difficult forms of self-awareness is noticing when we're maintaining something simply because it's familiar or expected or sentimental or historically meaningful, not because it still belongs in its current form. You may reach a point, and for me, I've been reflecting on Pongo. Has been gone for 6 months now. Pongo is the foster dog that we didn't seek out. He came into our lives one day around this time of year. It was actually on the first day of school for my daughter, and we found him in a parking lot, and he was not going to live much longer. And as soon as we found him, I said, girls, you know we can't keep him, but we're going to help get him better and find him a home. I had no idea that day that would be a 3.5+ year journey to connect him with his forever home. And it couldn't have worked out any better. It ended up being like a best possible case situation for him in the end. It took over 3.5 years to get there, though. So that, here we are. It's been 6 months since he left. And I'm recording this right here at the same time, like, the first day of school week. And that's when he came into our lives. And so full circle is kind of a theme that has been coming up for me. and I've been really leaning into my meditation lately. The festival it's about 2 weeks since the festival ended, and a lot is revealed in those 2 weeks. I initially thought I would talk about the festival on a podcast episode the very next day after it ended, and then I realized, no, wow, there's still so much happening. And just now, it's really feeling like I'm settling back into my life that I love so much, that was disrupted for the festival because I went into execution mode and creation mode and all this stuff. And now I'm settling back in, and I'm reflecting on Pongo and how different this year looks for us, because life looks different, because for so many years Pongo had become part of our daily life. And also, I knew all along, like, this is not our dog. This is not going to be this way forever. This is just the season that we're in. So I kind of asked, when did this become part of my life, right? And even when I knew the answer to that, I had to reflect on, but I had to keep checking back in to make sure, this is truly my initial instinct that we're going to help him, but we're not going to keep him forever. This is not our dog, was right. And it eventually got to the point where, and this is kind of what we'll talk about in this episode, is it was time. And there's a whole episode on this with, if you go back, I don't have it right in front of me, but it's a recent one, maybe around 73 or 74, is an episode about what I learned about stewardship from, it's a really powerful episode. It's actually part of a 3-part, like a trilogy. And that's number 1 in the 3-part series. So check that out if that's speaking to you. And I want to talk about how bizarre it is that human beings can incorporate almost anything into normal. Like a person you see on the way to carpool every day, and somewhere you drive every Tuesday, your dog sleeps in this same exact place. You work from this certain building. You call somebody whenever something happens, and you perform this tiny ritual every morning. And you maintain an obligation. And eventually you stop consciously choosing it. It's becomes simply what life is. And then one day it changes. And suddenly you become aware of how much invisible architecture had been built around that thing. My reflection lately has been about how things become part of a life. And I'm not even talking about the big ceremonial things, the tiny repetitive things. Something that happens often enough, and eventually you stop experiencing it as something that you're doing. It just becomes part of the architecture of your life. And then you're like, oh yeah, architecture can be remodeled. Going back to what I said earlier about normal, repetition creates normal. Our brains are pattern making machines. Repeated experiences become increasingly automatic because automation saves cognitive energy. Of course, that's useful. Imagine if you had to consciously renegotiate every single morning. Do I still drink tea? Do I still drive this route? Are we still friends? Is this mine? Do I do holiday this way? Do I run my business like this? Do I still need to respond when this person sends me something? We could not function. Therefore, the brain, doing what it does, it turns repeated behavior into default behavior. And the reason that that's important to recognize is because default is not the same thing as choice. Something can begin as a conscious choice and eventually continue almost entirely through momentum. And this is true of friendships, romantic relationships, family dynamics, jobs, routines, traditions, possessions, subscriptions, responsibilities, communication patterns, identities, creative practices, the ways we spend our time. The list goes on. And sometimes we don't even discover that something has been default until the default starts rubbing against who we've become. And when you feel that friction is information. The important thing is that nothing has to be wrong. Nothing has to be wrong. Culturally, of course, it makes sense. Toxic job, leave. Toxic relationship, get out of there. Dangerous situation, run, get out. Like when something's wrong, of course it makes sense to leave. What if it's not bad though? That's the whole thing. Nothing has to be wrong. It doesn't have to be bad. Whatever it is, the job can be fine. The house can be beautiful. The tradition can be lovely. The friendship can be good. The person hasn't done anything terrible. You still love the animal. I love Pongo. I loved him, And you simply don't want to participate in it in the same way anymore. And that's a real place to be sometimes. And you can sit here and build this whole narrative or create this. You can have all these conversations to try to justify to yourself or to whatever about why you feel the way you feel. Ultimately, though, what's the truest thing for me is that this worked for me. And now I want something different. And obviously with Pongo, Pongo was a great dog, 3.5 years. And look, I was actively trying along the way, but not like every day for 3.5 years. At some point, there were other priorities in my life that required my attention. My energy needed to go there. And so finding a suitable home for him couldn't be my number one priority. And I wasn't willing to just let him go anywhere because he was such a special and amazing dog. And we cared about him very deeply. And so it was definitely, I had to surrender of the way I thought it was going to go for sure. And be open to it being even better than I imagined, which it was. But I learned so much, especially once I released him and things opened up. Again, listen to that episode, or those 3 episodes. It's about living fully in temporary chapters, what a foster dog taught me about stewardship. And the second one is, if you love something, let it go. And it's about what happens, like when the horse runs. This was happening right as the year of the horse was beginning. The year of the snake was ending, and the timing again was beautiful because I was shedding this, what had been a part of my life that I didn't actually consciously choose. I did not go out saying, hey, let me go find a dog. Let me go adopt a dog. Let me go bring a dog into my life. This dog just arrived in my life. And it was like, okay, well, so this is, I guess we're doing this now. We're taking care of this dog. And you can listen to that episode to find out initially what delayed us finding him a home and being able to do that. Going back to what I was saying about the truest sentence for me now, nothing has to be wrong. Pongo didn't do anything wrong. He was the sweetest boy. Oh my gosh. I knew what life I wanted for myself. And it did not include, the next 10 or more years of having the responsibility of a 60 plus pound dog. And who, of course, I loved having him around, but that was just not something that I had other plans for my life and things I want to do and ways I want to experience life. And this was just not something that was part of it. And I knew there was someone out there who would be able to give, because this dog was so amazing, this would be like the dog of somebody's dream, and why would I want to keep that from them? And so I want to release Pongo so that he's free to go be with someone who has created a life around wanting to include a dog like him, and there's lots of people that are like that. And we got fortunate and found somebody that was exactly the case. They were exactly looking for him. He was the dog of their dreams, And what a blessing it was to have gotten to experience stewarding that relationship for all those years. The 6 months since releasing him has revealed that there was once a Pongo-shaped structure to my life. His needs, his physical presence, his routines, his sounds, his care, where he was in the house, what I had to think about before leaving, how his energy was relating to the other 66-pound dog in the house, all the tiny accommodations that eventually stopped feeling like accommodations because they were simply life with Pongo. And then stewardship asked me a different question. And it wasn't like a question of, do I love him? Because yes, I had already established that. Of course I love him. It was more like, okay, what does loving him require now? And that is a much harder question because it's so layered. Ultimately, it was, I am not the place where this needs to live anymore. And that whole experience with Pongo and the time since has given me evidence that endings or transitions do not erase belonging, because Pongo belonged. Absolutely, he belonged in our family. The experience was real. The relationship mattered. And 6 months later, I don't have to sit here and deny any of that to recognize that my life has reorganized and it's opened up and it feels more free and more expansive and more aligned with the compelling future that I have visualized. And of course, I'm always open to that compelling future, the same or better. Be open to it being even better than you imagine. I don't have some tight grip on a specific compelling future. I just know, like, show me how good it can get. The better it gets, the better it gets, you know? Okay, earlier I was talking about architecture. When I was a little girl, if you asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would say an architect. And it's interesting because one of my recent episodes on Invisible Threads, the crafting a decentralized art archive, I talked about all these back to school boards that I did, thousands of them over the years. And they have that question on there. When I grow up, I want to be ... And these parents use it year after year. And it's, again, right around the first day of school. I've already told y'all that. And every year since they were in pre-K, I've made my own daughters a back to school, a first day of school board. And I ask them questions, like an interview, and they give me answers, and then I write it and we take pictures. And this year, my oldest is a senior, and I realized, oh my gosh, I've officially made her boards for the first day of every year since pre-K, and this is her last year of school, not talking about college or anything, but like grade school, primary, secondary school. And I think about that question, that it's on all these boards when I grow up. And then so for me, it was architect. And it's interesting because I really have been reflecting a lot lately about how architecture is really prevalent in my life. Am I a licensed certified architect? No, of course not. I'm not. However, I look at all the ways I'm an architect of my own life and things like this. So that's an interesting thing that's been swirling around in my mind lately and in my journals and whatnot. Absence becomes architecture too. Initially, when something leaves, we experience the empty space, and you notice the missing text. You notice the empty dog bed, the unused room, the person who's not sitting there, the appointment that's no longer on Tuesday, so you're not making that drive every Tuesday, the responsibility you don't have anymore, the silence. Like the absence itself feels like an object. Humans adapt, though, and eventually that empty space isn't empty anymore, and life grows into it, and you develop another routine, and your attention goes elsewhere, and you use the room differently, and you spend that hour differently, and you relate to yourself differently. The absence becomes part of the architecture too, and this is why sometimes we can't imagine life after something ends, because we're trying to imagine our current life minus the thing. So, of course, that looks like a hole. But that's not what it is. It's not current life minus the thing. Life restructures around the opening. And just like with Pongo, so life instantly started restructuring around the opening. Instantly. I renovated 2 rooms within the first 2 weeks. And it just kept rolling from there. As soon as he left, I mean, really, if I think about it, I started a quarterly dinner and makers exchange. With a group of freaking amazing, talented, just phenomenal women. and had the whole podcast apprenticeship with Chloe, had a whole 10-day festival, which was a living retrospective of the last 20 years of my creative work. I released the first guide in the second generation of Mis Sombres. There's a lot of other stuff that's happened in there too. What I'm saying is, like, just since letting Pongo go 6 months ago, life is blown wide open. So that feels good, and that I wanted to share that story. We do have this odd cultural habit of interpreting permanence as evidence of value. Like, okay, well, a 50-year marriage must have mattered, and a 6-month relationship apparently mattered less. I don't believe this. I'm saying, and you don't have to believe it or agree with it either. I'm noticing a cultural habit of interpreting permanence as evidence of value. And a lifelong friendship is considered successful. A friendship that lasted 10 years and then ended, so that failed? Like, why? Why did it fail? Because it was an incredible 10-year friendship, and then you went your separate ways, or whatever may have happened. So duration is not the same thing as significance, because somebody can fundamentally alter your life and only belong to like 3 years of it. And a business can serve its purpose and close. It doesn't have to go on for generations and generations. A home can hold an extraordinary chapter and then be sold. That was the home I built, the first house I built. Drew it myself. I wasn't an architect, so I drew what I wanted, then took it to an architect to have actual plans made. But I built that house, and I was pregnant with both of my daughters in that house, and I brought both of my daughters home from the hospital to that house. And I had both of their first birthday parties at that house. And I sold that house. I left that house. Somebody else lives in that house now. That home held an extraordinary chapter for me and for my girls. It's the first home they ever knew. A dream can propel you somewhere, and then it can stop being the dream. That's okay. A dog can completely belong to your life and then belong somewhere else. A later chapter doesn't reach backward and invalidate the earlier one. And that's what I want to get across right here. You don't have to destroy the past in order to authorize the future. They can exist as what they were, and you can be grateful for everything for the season that it was in. When the whole idea of this episode we're talking about is when the frequency of your life changes. Pardon, I might have gotten away from the mic. When the frequency of your life changes. And sometimes the form is what's changing, not the love. The form is what's changing. For instance, my oldest just got her license and she's driving and she's a senior. And so motherhood is looking different. They have independence now, their own transportation. So things, the love is still there, but the way our relationship looks, it's changing. The nature of it's changing because some of the things that I was there for before, the needs are changing and the lifestyle is changing and all of that. And so a hands-on parent becomes a parent of an increasingly independent teenager. And maybe as a business owner, you decide to stop offering something that you've offered for 15 years. Or a holiday tradition is going to get simplified. A daily practice becomes a weekly practice. Who knows? A mentor becomes a peer. A home becomes somebody else's home. Like all of this stuff. A big one for me, again, tune into the last week or 2 weeks ago, a creative project becomes an archive. I've been telling y'all, I've been sitting on archival gold, just leaning into intuition. It's telling me, don't stop living your life. Document, document, document. Archive, archive, archive. You don't have to stop living to switch gear into editor, content creator, storyteller. You'll know when your life opens up and you have time to go into the archive. And that's where we're arriving right now, is life is opening up. And the archive, it's years deep, y'all. I'm not even kidding. It's years deep. And I'm excited to dive in. And there's not been any rush because, quite frankly, I find this to be timeless in many ways. I really do find it to be timeless. It's not, there's no rush. It's going to arrive right on time, which is exciting. I was talking about sometimes the form changes and not the love. And then my archive story got off on a tangent, I suppose. We're clinging to the existing form because we confuse the form with the relationship itself. However, connection and access aren't identical, and love and proximity aren't identical, and meaning and maintenance aren't identical, and gratitude and continuation aren't identical. All of this, whatever your particular circumstances are, I'm hoping this episode transcends that and it can reach you and meet you where you are. I feel like it can, because this can hold true for so many different things. That's what I'm realizing as I'm reflecting on it, particularly with this full circle theme. And also with the energy cost of maintenance, because everything in your life requires some amount of maintenance. And some things require almost none. Super, right? Others require enormous amounts of attention. And attention is finite. So every yes creates a tiny ecosystem that you now have to maintain. Every possession, every friendship, every platform, every project, every obligation, every recurring event, every communication channel. To be clear, this isn't about becoming ruthless and eliminating anything that requires effort, because that's not the point. And that's not what I'm saying. Relationships are going to require effort. Children are going to require effort. Art requires effort. Being an entrepreneur requires a whole heck of a lot of effort. Things worth having often require enormous effort. Being healthy requires effort. So the question really is not well, does this cost energy? It's, do I still consciously choose where this energy is going? Do I still consciously choose where this energy is going? And if you're asking that question and your answer, answer is, hey, wait, I'm not sure that the answer is yes, I want to choose differently, there can be some discomfort of becoming the one who changes it. Sometimes nobody else is going to initiate the reset because the existing system is working for them. This doesn't mean it's some malicious thing. It simply does. If you are always available, somebody gets accustomed to your availability. If you always organize Christmas, everybody gets accustomed to you organizing Christmas. If you are the emotional processor, the organizer, fixer, initiator, updater, caretaker, vacation planner, keeper of a particular rhythm, everyone else learns the rhythm that you've helped establish. Perhaps it's a rhythm that you love. Perhaps you love the role. Perhaps the system works for you too. Or when you say, do I still consciously choose where this energy is going? And then your answer is like, well, wait, I just became the default, not necessarily this isn't what I want. Then you change. Suddenly you're the disruption. And that can feel uncomfortable, especially if nobody did anything wrong, quote unquote wrong, right? We talked about that earlier. Your discomfort does not automatically mean the change is wrong, though. You can be experiencing the friction of replacing an established pattern. Perhaps one you didn't even consciously choose, but it's just like where you're at. And so you can reset without burning it all down. There's an episode this reminds me of, like what I was going to say is a reset doesn't have to be a rupture. I have a whole episode. Resets are not relational ruptures. It's a really good one you could tune into because I've literally talked about this before. Sometimes we imagine that we only have two choices. We continue exactly as it is, or there's a big dramatic end. There's a huge, enormous middle that it's funny. We sometimes just tend to, we catastrophe. We think one extreme or the other and forget, no, there's this beautiful place in the middle. Less, different, occasionally, seasonally, with different expectations, without the old role, without constant access, without responsibility, with a new boundary, with a new format, with a different format, from further away. There's all these different things. A reset can be an edit. It doesn't have to be a deletion. It doesn't have to be a wipeout. Then, after editing, you realize, oh, this thing fits my life beautifully again. You can ask yourself, does this still belong here? I want to invite you right now, mentally walk through your own life. I'm not walking through your life looking for what to get rid of. That's too aggressive. That's not what we're doing. I want you to notice what you're maintaining. What are you maintaining in your life? And then ask, did I choose this recently? Or am I continuing an old choice? And we're doing this without judgment, without blame, without shame, without guilt, without anything. It's just, with loving kindness is the approach we're taking. With loving kindness, with curiosity. With curiosity. Did I choose this recently, or am I continuing an old choice? Does the current frequency still fit? Would I create this arrangement today? Am I maintaining this because I value it, or because changing it would be uncomfortable? Does this need to end, or does it simply need a different form? This is always a good one too. Kind of well, if nobody were disappointed by the change, what would I naturally change? And I love these questions. And this is what I was going to say it's like, if you knew you couldn't fail, what would you try? I'm sure you've been asked that at some time. Maybe you've journaled. Hopefully you've journaled on that at some time. If you knew you wouldn't fail, what would you try? Or if you knew the answer would be yes, what would you ask, type of thing, or whatever, something along those lines, okay? So if nobody were disappointed by that, I thought of another one. People say, if money wasn't a factor, what would you do? That's another question people ask. So if nobody were disappointed by the change, what would you naturally change? We live in relationship with other people. So it's not that like disappointment's never going to matter or never should matter, because it should. I mean, we live in relationship with other people. But asking that question temporarily removes the social consequence so you can hear your own answer. It's why people ask that question. If money wasn't a factor, what would you want to do? Because then it allows you to say, oh, I don't have to be practical here. I don't have to be logical here. I don't have to worry about if this is going to produce enough income to support my life. Somebody's just saying, hey, if money didn't matter, how would you spend your days? What would you do? And so you get to answer from that place. It's the same type of thing. So it just allows you to hear your own answer in a different way. And then you can decide responsibly what to do with that information. Life is allowed to reorganize, friends. Pongo. Let's come back to old Pongo. 6 months. That is tangible proof. I mean, he's literally been going for 6 months. That is tangible proof that there was a time when I could not fully know what life without that daily stewardship would feel like. Now that life exists. It's not existing as a replacement. It's not like, well, it's better because he's gone. Or it doesn't mean that while he was here that he didn't matter, because he absolutely did. It simply exists. And somewhere else, I think of this often, old Pongo has a life that's reorganized too. You know, it's fun to think about that. And so I am here thinking knowing there are things currently woven into my life right now, into yours too, that won't be there 5 years from now. And there are things that we've never even encountered yet that will someday feel impossible to imagine living without. Guys, that's life. People arrive, animals arrive, ideas arrive, places arrive, responsibilities arrive, dreams arrive. And sometimes they leave and they transform and they move further away. Sometimes we move. And the whole goal is not to freeze everything we love so that nothing ever changes. It's to be awake enough inside of our own lives to recognize what the moment is asking of us, and not to get swept up in habits that become default without checking in to say, did I consciously choose this? Is this what I want right now? Is this the best thing for me right now? I believe it is our responsibility to periodically reconsider the structures that we've allowed to become normal in our lives. It is one of the ways that you can love yourself. I encourage you to love yourself. Practice self-love in all the ways you can. Tune into those episodes on Pongo. I really think it's episode 73, 74, and 75. If not, it's like somewhere right around there. I'll see y'all next week. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in to Dreamed It, Then Real Lifed It. I hope today's episode sparked something powerful within you. Remember, every step you take towards your vision counts, no matter how small. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please take a second to hit that subscribe button or leave a review. That would be amazing. Or share the podcast with someone who's ready to bring their dreams into reality too. And if you're looking to dive deeper, connect with me on social media at Dreamed It, Then Real Lifed It, or at BE_what you want. Or visit dreameditthenreallifedit.us for more resources on aligning your life, business, and dreams. Until next time, keep dreaming and keep manifesting your dreams into real life. Love you, friends.